place. And Benazir had invited me to come and stay with her along with another friend. She loved having her friends from Oxford to come and stay in Pakistan. And summer of 77, she said, you know, come and stay, and we can do this, we can go to Gilgit, we can, you know, you can understand more about Pakistan. But then, of course, politics intervened and real life intervened. And very soon, as all of you in Pakistan will know, within days, literally, of her return, having finished Oxford, she just had her 24th birthday party, the military coup took place. And then suddenly you get, again, I feel it is like a Shakespearean play, because you get the sort of change of scene, the change of act, the drama. And you all know the history. Her father was arrested, put on trial for conspiracy to murder, and condemned to death. And it was at this point I got the letter which really did change my life, wherein she said, I don't know what your parents would think of you coming to a country governed by bayonets, but if you want to come, do come and write some articles. She was very keen that the international community should understand what was going on in Pakistan. And maybe Aitzaz will talk more about this, because using the judicial system, the judicial trial, it sort of allayed people's fears that, you know, Bhutto was on trial, he would have a trial, it would be fair, and the outcome would be a just verdict, etc. And this is where I plunged in as a very naive person to try and sit and write some articles and comprehend what was going on. And I think what I've tried to convey in the book is, from my Western viewpoint, we were incredibly ignorant. You know, countries, as I say, we didn't have the same international communication that we've got now. We didn't have Facebook, we didn't have all the accoutrements we've now got to understand each other's countries. And I literally arrived because I thought I was going to a hot country in a short skirt and a t-shirt, because I didn't know about dress. I hadn't understood any of that. And there had never been time with Benazir because we were busy with our Oxford lives. It was a very rapid transformation. And so what I'm conveying in this book is, it's also a growing up book for myself, and I think for Westerners and our Western understanding of an Islamic country. And I hope I've portrayed that fairly, because that's what I've wanted to do. I certainly had very little idea myself, and I had to learn, but it was through the friendship with Benazir that I learned. And that's the other point that I hope I've conveyed, is that she never put me sort of at a distance as a foreigner, as a Ferengi. I lived in her home when I could. I mean, even at times when she was under house arrest, she kept me within, and it was through her eyes and through her that I learned, and I understood customs, manners, the sort of traditions. Even when she took me on her first political tour to the Northwest frontier, as it then was, to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And I remember we got swept along in a crowd of people, and she sort of whispered to me as we were just arriving at one place. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, but roast chicken was laid out and a whole spread of food. And she said to me, you must sample the food. You cannot not eat. It would be insulting to the hospitality we're receiving. So little things like that. So I grew up immensely during that year, and our friendship continued obviously through the bad times, which was the execution of her father. And then the terrible time when I didn't actually see her for 5 years, most of which she was in prison or under house arrest. And so it's a journey for both of us. Obviously, as I say, she had you know, a lot going on in her life, and I dipped in and out. But with the dipping in and out of actually seeing her, we were constantly in touch. And so it's also a tribute to her and to that friendship. And one of the reasons I wanted to write it was because we both now have 3 adult children. They were teenagers at the time of her assassination, but now they're obviously adults. And you know, to my children, she was always Auntie Benazir. I was always, for her children, you know, the English aunt. And I felt I needed to leave that legacy so they'd understand what a friendship like this can do, and what it was about against the backdrop of an extraordinary country's history. I think that's a sort of a taster of what's in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that clearly comes through in the book. And I mean, you know, the children are present. The children are sort of there. It's obvious that you've got an audience in mind, and it's an important audience. So the way we've kind of talked about doing this is I want each of our speakers to have a chance to comment on the book and to probe it a little bit, to kind of push Victoria on aspects of the book that maybe she skirted around or she avoided entirely, in the spirit of getting out as much of this friendship and this personality, who's larger than life personality, as possible. So we're going to start with Professor Salima Hashmi. Hand over to you, your comments on the book and any questions you might have for Victoria.
Well, first of all, I better put the record straight. I did not know Benazir. I met her several times, you know, at different times of her life, when she was a teenager and she was a politician, and once when she was the prime minister, but I did not know her. And therefore, I'm the outsider to this story. But a very, very interested outsider, because of course, as mentioned, she impacted the lives of all of us. And our lives are intertwined with the story that Victoria tells. I mean, you know, the first part of it starts in this sort of, as she said, the salad days. So you get an idea of a person, a young person, as she herself said, pampered and brought up, and you know, with a great deal of the world at her feet, and then that changes. And you know, the story proceeds, and although one knows it as a Pakistani, you know the story, but the way that Victoria tells it, it kind of gives you these little insights, little vignettes, which make you smile, which make you laugh, and as an artist, I would thoroughly love the fact that she was responsible for the murals done by William Morris being, you know, restored, and the lighting done, and so on. So there are these little things which make her a person, quite distinct from how we knew her, which was a very different astronomer. I know when reading the book, one is very aware of two things. One, the loyalty that the author has, and then the strong friendship. And both of these values, I think, are so much part of culture in our part of the world. I mean, of course, they're part of every society, but they're very intrinsic to the way that we read ourselves and other people. And in times of stress, both of these qualities, friendship and loyalty, become tremendously important. So the part of this story, which to me is the unknown part, which I was riveted by, is where Victoria had the ringside seat to the courtroom, where the appeal against the death sentence was being heard in the Supreme Court. And that to me is a really amazing part of this book, because as a Pakistani, we were not privy to these details. There was no photograph of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto from the moment that he was arrested for the supposed crime for which he was sentenced. So we had no idea of actually what was happening. And I was delighted to find that she's done these little sketches of the court. And they're so endearing, because, you know, I suddenly see these sort of curious characters who were the judges, and, you know, who were just names to us, and we had no idea. Of course, one read a kind of account in the newspapers, but as you know, as we all know, the newspapers were heavily censored at the time. So suddenly I get an insight into that part of that story that we knew nothing about. And she was literally had a ringside seat, because she was sitting in the first row and she could see these people. Well, the next day they made sure that some fat policeman took those seats, so she was sort of pushed to the side. But then she had this wonderful little sketch she has made of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and, you know, his profile, which is what was able to see from where she was sitting. And what was news to me was that she, with her touch typing, was the person who actually typed out pages and pages and pages of his rebuttal to the white paper, which was, a saga of his crimes put out by Zia-ul Haq. And those pages that she typed out, and with Benazir's help, they were taken, smuggled back to Bhutto in prison, where he corrected them, and they came back again. I mean, it's an amazing story. For people who like Aitzaz, who have been in prison, know how difficult it is to get books, to get papers, to have access. The fact that these pages went in and then out, and then they formed the book that we are familiar with, which is called If I'm Assassinated, which was Bhutto's story, which which was smuggled into Pakistan post his hanging. So, for anyone who has a sense of history, and of course we lived through that terrible time, the 11 years of the dark oppressive regime of General Zia-ul Haq. These insights that she has given us, these details that she has given us, are really extraordinary. And I mean, there's so much more, but I mean, you have the little bit flash of humor in which Bhutto's comments, when these two young women are working to get that story out, typing and getting it, that, with two presidents of the Oxford Union helping me, I should be able to get a good story together. So, you have that flash of humor, which makes it so credible, the whole recounting of what happened, so very credible. I think that there's so much that one could say about this book, but there are moments which she recalls and which I remember were important to me, not only as a Pakistani, but as a woman. The image of the Prime Minister, a woman who is visibly pregnant, who is inspecting the troops. I mean, I'm sure it must have rankled many, many people, including the ones who were in charge of the troops. But for me, that was a moment in which, being a woman, being a would-be mother, and being a political leader, all of these things come together. And I remember that at that time, one was extremely proud because it changed one's perception of oneself as a Pakistani woman. And going back now to the memory of that through this book is something that I found extremely valuable, and it really moved me all over again. And of course, there's so much in which she has, because I must say she's been such a meticulous record keeper. The way that she has kept records of moments, of letters, she's been putting these things and noting them in her diary, that one feels that the immediacy of the moment. And that so many years later, today in a very changed Pakistan, I think at least for me, having lived through all those years, it's really been a way of reevaluating Benazir's contribution, and also looking at certain things that have not changed, that have made us what we are today. I think that one of the things that really I had totally forgotten, like, for example, Benazir's defense of Jam Saki, to hear that recounted, and to read about what Benazir said about what a revolution is, that it is, when people have the courage to take what is rightfully theirs, which has been denied to them. So for me, that's a kind of an insight into her thinking, which I was not privy to before. And I think it rounds out a person who was, I mean, we knew her as a prime minister, we knew her as a person who made a great contribution in many ways, and we knew her as a person who also was very disappointing in certain ways. But I think her recalling the moment in which she was so brutally cut down, I think there again you have the way that Victoria has recounted it. I think I lived through again that moment of immense grief. And it was a nationwide grief. And I remembered how the hush that was there across Pakistan, even her fiercest opponents, I think, felt a sense of profound loss. And it was followed by what? It was followed by something that I recognize. It was followed by an immense rage, which Victoria was far away, but she still, of course, knows about all of those riots. And, you know, when she talks about the UN Commission's report and really takes the Pakistani state to task, and they say, you know, how there was incompetence, there was possibly collusion, there was lack of transparency. I mean, all the things that we recognize in Pakistan. So I think this is a very important book. I'm very grateful for all kinds of little things that she's put in, things like, you know, how Benazir gave her this plant and she said, you know, look after George. It was a gardenia, and how George didn't flower after that first summer. But after that, whenever Victoria had a gardenia plant, it was called George. I mean, I love these little things that she's put in. Lots of funny stories, lots of, well, wistful stories also. There's going to be a lot of discussion on this book. And quite rightfully so, because people who hated Benazir and people who loved Benazir and people who were extremely curious about Benazir and people who felt, especially with young people today who didn't know her, they want to know what it was that they were denied by whoever. And I think that it's important when this story is read that they themselves should be able to gauge how Pakistan's history would have developed, what kind of pathways would have been there, and which were forever closed. So I think that in that sense, I'm tremendously, I mean, one could go on and on, recalling little bits of things that she put in. I mean, the moment in which Bhutto's lawyer, Ghulam Ali Memon, died before her eyes of a heart attack at a critical moment, the day before the final statement by the defense. I mean, there are moments like that in which you really absolutely, you know, taken by this book, and you want to know more. And so, yeah, so that's it. I think people should read it, make up their own minds. But thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Salima. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's.
Thank you very much. Victoria, is there anything that you would like to sort of respond immediately before we move to Mr. Aitzaz Ahsan?
No, not really. I mean, I'm just thrilled, I suppose, for me, because as an author, you know, you write things and you're not quite sure whether they're going to strike the right chord or strike the right sort of nerve in what someone else interprets out of it. And I'm really moved, actually, Salima, that you have picked out these little things, which, you know, I was thinking, I mean, I like about George the Gardenia. It just, you know, that was what it was. And, you know, one might have thought, well, word count as an author, you know, shall I put that in? Shall I, you know, hard story, journalist, da, da, da. But to me, it just was it had to go in. I mean, it was those sort of little tiny things. And I think another one which I particularly liked actually was, again, Benazir was very generous. You know, she often would arrive with something, and when I'd organized this supper party, and I can see it because actually it took place in this room where I'm sitting of my old house. I mean, I refurbished it a bit, but very much in this angle with this light. And she brought me a little tiny box as a present in thanks for organizing the supper party, because the Oxford Friends were a big thing. Every time she'd come, she'd want to see the Oxford Friends, which again was her, you know, wanting to stay in touch and how important Oxford was for her. But she handed me this box, and as she handed it to me, she was looking pleased, but at the same time, she looked hugely disappointed because I happened to be wearing a very small pair of pearl earrings. And in the box was an identical pair of pearl earrings. And I mean, I could have not had that episode in because, you know, it's not germane to the story, but to me it was germane to the story. But it was so typical of Benazir because she immediately had a response, which was, you've got 2 daughters. Well, now you've got 2 pairs of pearl earrings.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
So I'm really glad if those little stories were, you know, that you're endorsing what I hoped is that they were worth putting in, because I think what you've expressed very, very sort of clearly, Salima, is that, you know, there is Benazir, the politician. I suppose I was so lucky because I knew the other side that I can't almost understand what it's like not to know the other side. Mm. So, you know, I've not betrayed confidences, but at the same time, I've given a little portrait of these other aspects to her, which I just thought were, you know, there is an element of humor too. Yes. There was laughter, there was fun, which was, you know, she did have a great sense of fun. So thank you for that. And, you know, I hope when others read the book, they'll have the same reaction, which Salima's had, because I've written it for all Pakistanis. I've written it for all her friends. It's my story and they're my memories. Others have got their memories, but I have written it for you all so that you should understand a bit more, and the next generation who don't know and who won't know about her. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of moments in the book which are actually very funny, you know, which made me smile. Now, I'd like to hand over to a man who did know Benazir, the politician, and who comes at it from a slightly different angle. Mr. Aitzaz Ahsan, I wonder if you would provide us your own views, your own comments, reaction to the book. And again, I invite you to probe Victoria a little bit and then push her a little bit on what she might have said.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Victoria and Nadir. It's a pleasure to be here, especially with Dr. Salima Hashmi. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you may look at it, the post-COVID new norm is going to wreck the airline industry, because we might have flown into London to have this conference. And many an airline is going to be hit hard by the hundreds and thousands of board meetings that are being held dispersed over large areas of the globe rather than coming together. But Victoria's book is a breath of fresh air. It's an amazing book. I couldn't drop it. I couldn't leave it since it started. And it makes Benazir come alive. She's like sitting in your drawing room in front of you. And Victoria knew her so well from the what she calls the elite Oxford Union days. And there is no elitism really that comes out of or exudes from these 2 young girls or ladies, Victoria and Benazir. They're at that time, ignorant to the point of being innocent, and innocent to the point of being ignorant about what's happening in the world, and they really couldn't care much more than for a yellow MG sports car, and of having coffee here and going to parties, etc. But what later inspired people about Benazir were many more things than that. Victoria has covered a very large aspect of Benazir's career and life. There have been some which, since they have been, she's not been privy to them, but then I just want to speak about them, because behind this continuing young, youthful, Mills and Boon's reading, postgraduate of Oxford, is a very tough woman, As one thing that Salima has pointed out is, I think, extremely indicative of the tough character she had, all was of delivering a child while being the Prime Minister of a country. And she's been the first to do that. I think Jacinda Ardern has followed her in New Zealand, but she was the first. For it to have happened in a Western country would have been amazing. For it to have happened in a third world country was more so, and to have happened in a third world Muslim country was unthinkable. But she was her natural self. Her first child was delivered. Actually, Ziaul Haq had miscalculated. Ziaul Haq and the army knew that she was with child. They calculated that the delivery date would be in November. So they fixed the date of the elections in November. But Begum Nusrat Bhutto, the mother, Benazir, Begum Nusrat Bhutto, the grandmother, Benazir, the mother, and Dr. Setna, a Parsi, a minority belonging to the Parsi minority. The three of them kept it so secret that the army was wrong-footed. She delivered Bilawal on the 21st of September through a C-section. And imagine, she was on a truck campaigning on the 23rd evening. I was with her in Karachi. So she showed such sense of strength of character and strength of person. The pain must have been very physical, but she was strong. Not only that, the way she dealt with the generals. I recall a meeting in the Foreign Office where 2 or 3 generals spoke, and they criticized her government. They criticized us. I was the Interior Minister. They criticized us for being very soft on India and not taking advantage of certain options that had opened up for us against India. Sabzada Yaqub Khan, who had been Ziaul Haq's foreign minister, and we had inherited him, unfortunately, immediately after the army chief Aslam Beg had spoken, got up and said, Madam, we move for lunch. Benazir didn't take a second in replying. She said, no, Sabzada Saab, everybody remain seated while I have something to say. She was not expected to say something, but she said, while I have something to say. She went to the rostrum, everybody sat down, She spoke for about 5 minutes, but she concluded simply. She said, gentlemen, Army Chief, Deputy Army Chief, or whosoever, the Commander 10 Corps, the DGISI, will you please come to my office for tea at 6 p.m. Give me your plans, and I will direct all the armed forces to act upon them. And we start today. They didn't have plans. They were totally stripped. The Pakistan army, the generals, didn't have plans. They could have attacked India, but they wanted to throw the burden on the civilians. And only she could defend the civilians in such a manner. I recall also, you will or recall, or let me refresh your memories, the Soviet Union, the Soviet, the Pakistanis, the Afghans, the Americans, perhaps other countries, they signed the Geneva Pact. The Geneva Pact was signed on the 10th of February, 1988. Under it, the Soviets agreed to withdraw the last Soviet soldier from Afghanistan on the 10th of February, 1989, exactly 1 year later. In between, in December, Bibi became the prime minister and a new cabinet was formed. Otherwise, the whole move of retreat and most of the actions that were required to implement the Geneva Accord were going on very smoothly. Now we became the government, and we were a new government, and within 2 months, we had to withdraw the troops. The Soviet Union had to withdraw the troops. Now we wanted, before we could endorse the decision, we wanted briefings, and more than one briefing. In the briefing, we realized that the army, Pakistan army, and the generals, and they were trying to keep it from us, but they had decided to occupy Afghanistan after the Soviets had left. Initially, the first target was Jalalabad, then Kabul and the Oxus, Mazar Sharif and Oxus. We did not agree with that. And in smaller meetings, there used to be a kind of argument or a discussion, to say the least, between the Army Chief Aslam Beg, who thought if India attacked, Afghanistan on the other side would be our strategic depth, our strategic depth. Now, this is not an army that is trained on guerrilla warfare principles. It's a static army virtually, with static guns and to fire with, but they thought of it as the strategic depth. And they were going to play favorites with who to support in Afghanistan. Our viewpoint was that the Soviets would not be withdrawing as meaning withdrawing. They would be leaving fortresses behind. Jalalabad would be a fortress. Kabul would be a fortress. Herat would be a fortress. Kandahar would be a fortress. Mazar Sharif would be a fortress. The land around it may not be well defended, but these were fortresses they were not going to leave. So we opposed it. Ultimately, we had the president against us, Ghulam Isa Khan, the army chief against us, Aslam Beg, the DGISI against us, Hamid Gul, the foreign minister, our foreign minister, supporting them that we would take over Afghanistan after when there's a vacuum. We kept insisting there weren't going to be a vacuum. But then we realized that they were winning over the parliamentarians, our colleagues, the ultimate sovereign. And we could do nothing if the sovereign wanted to withdraw, to chase them up. So we had a meeting, an in-camera meeting, in 1989, January, 14 days before the Jalalabad deadline of 10th of February 1989. And there, the generals and our civilian officials, they addressed and made out their case. But, we were in a very small majority we weren't even in a majority, we were a coalition whereby we had formed the government. Otherwise, we had only 3 members in the Senate. The Senate had been packed by Ziaul until he died in the air crash. It had been packed by Ziaul, and we had 3 seats in the Senate, 3 senators out of 100 total senators. So we were in a precarious situation. When we asked, when the generals and when particularly Hamid Gul addressed the gathering, he had fire in his eyes. And he said 1 month Jalalabad, 3rd month Kabul, 6th month, and we are under the Oxus, on the banks of the Oxus, and we've taken over Afghanistan. This was a kind of a neo-imperialism. And she and I were sitting together. And she said, what do we do? I said, we have to let them go because the majority, overwhelming majority of the parliament has said that it would be criminal not to occupy Afghanistan when we had the opportunity. So we went and discussed it, and we finally indicated to the president that we would fall in line and allow, keeping our reservations, putting it down in writing. We put a paper down in writing that this would be a failure. She insisted that this be put on record. So we put it down on record. What happened was exactly what we had said. The Jalalabad operation was a total failure. Dead bodies started coming back. And ultimately, the Pakistan army had to call it off. Now, only she could, while she was soft and had a sense of humor, and there are so many lovely, endearing stories about her in The Fragrance of Tears. Some stories that is the other side of her. If she's facing east, the western side of her is our steel, our forged iron. And she was very, in one other story, I'll just try to rush it through. Rushdie's book was published. There were riots. In the riots in Pakistan, 7 people died by police firing on the main Blue Area Road, which is the main highway of Islamabad. She was in China. I was looking after the law and order and mainly the business of the state as the interior minister, and most of it was my responsibility. She came back on a time. I asked her whether she wanted to come back early. She said no. Her words were, Aitzaz, you do not cut short a visit to China or to America or to Russia or to India or to Great Britain and maybe Paris. So I'll come and I'm sure you can manage. She came back. We had a meeting at the airport. At the airport, she said, who's responsible? I said, I. She said, no, I don't want you, mean you. I mean, who ordered the firing? I said, I did. She said, no, finally she got so frustrated. She said, Aitzaz, I don't want to lose you. But I want to know, I think action should be taken. I said, then action should be taken against me. She said, that is what I want to avoid. I said, then I have already requested for a judicial inquiry by a High Court judge of the Lahore High Court. And he will come up with the findings. If it's against me, I'll go. If it's against anybody else, he'll go. The judicial inquiry was in fact concluded in our favor, and it held the miscreants responsible for the action. There are other such stories, many others that come to mind, like the one against the MQM and the action in Pakka Killa in Hyderabad, like her taking a strong position on military courts in Hyderabad. The army insisted on setting up military courts in Hyderabad. She said no. And I was mainly the person who had to speak to the army. She presided over the meeting. She'd say, ask me, what's your opinion? We took a position that we cannot have military courts under a civilian rule, and not us. We had been fighting military courts. We had resisted military courts. And it was abhorrent, according to our thinking, to have military courts trying civilians. So there was these elements also. But I don't think that these necessarily, this is because of the discussion we're doing, these necessarily distract from the fragrance of tears. Because the fragrance of tears, somehow, in fact, I must correct myself, somehow more people believe that she was the kind of draconian ruler that my brief account today, may give the impression of. Less of them think of her as a humane, humanitarian, loving, tearful at times, smiling, happy to receive a flower, the soft Benazir. So I think this fragrance of tears is actually the filling up that gap and doing more justice to her than stories like the ones that I have recounted. But I've recounted them only because I feel that the other part of her character as a decisive, as a leader, as a person who was not afraid to take on the high and the mighty, and that is the one they feared and they eliminated. They did not eliminate the Oxford girl. They eliminated the Prime Minister who wanted to be in charge and who knew what she was doing and who wanted peace in the region. I think Victoria very aptly says how different might it have been, not only for South Asia, but for the world, had Benazir and Rajiv Gandhi been able to put things right together. I think it's a wonderful contribution. I'm very grateful to Victoria because I've seen both sides of her. I've seen her cry at not being able to deliver piped gas to the kitchens of rural areas. I've seen her cry, and I've seen her face her generals strongly with determination. So she had that book. I marvel at the leaders today and marvel at the society who start believing in leaders who run out of the country, and from out of the country they criticize the generals. She did it while she was here, and fearlessly. And that, I think, together with Benazir, she would be incomplete without The Fragrance of Tears and Victoria's book.
Thank you. I think that's a really fascinating response to it, because, you know, when I read the book, I thought this is a brilliant book to give to students as a kind of introduction to Pakistan. Through this relationship, we see the politics of Pakistan, the culture of Pakistan, and actually what you've done, Mr. Aitzaz, is just bring us back to this hard as nails, tough politician who had an impact on the country through all of these things that are probably better known to political scientists. Victoria, I'd like to hand it back to you. There's a lot there that you might respond to. Can I just say to the audience, I am struggling to keep up with the comments on Facebook. I haven't yet seen a question. What I'm seeing is lots and lots and lots of comments saying, great book, Victoria, can't wait to read it. Congratulations. Bibi Shahid was a hero. So there's full of that, but no actual questions. So we may not get to questions from the audience, but if you do have them, please write them in the Facebook chat section. And Victoria, please, over to you. Your response, your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Aitzaz. I mean, I actually, my sub thought is I hope you're writing your memoir as well of Benazir, because I think we need to have everything you've said on the record as well. I think what I find, and of course, you know, I am aware of that aspect as well, but I wasn't writing on her so much, as you realize, as a politician. But I think the characteristic, and again, one didn't see it so much. It was maybe there in Oxford because she was, you know, particularly when she went to Harvard, she was very young. She had to be resourceful. And I think resourcefulness was at Harvard and it was at Oxford as making do, fitting in. And then you got the courage which began during this terrible year of 78, 79, when the mantle, so to speak, the political mantle fell on her shoulders because everybody was under arrest. Her mother was under arrest. All her father's political colleagues were under arrest. And so in a way, it's the prelude to what then followed, that steely determination and that extraordinary courage she had. And I, as a woman, I agree, and I'm very much aware of the extraordinary achievement of being pregnant. I mean, on both occasions, I mean, even the third occasion had its issues because she had to come to London. She had to have an operation as well. But the first and second pregnancies, and understanding a Muslim country as I do now, as I did not initially, I think it was quite extraordinary. And I think what I've actually put in the book, we in the West didn't understand that achievement. And it was very much, you know, when she became prime minister, everyone thought, oh, Pakistan's got a female prime minister. We've got Margaret Thatcher. Pakistan's got Benazir Bhutto. They had no idea of what that signified. And Salima, I wanted also to pick up on your point, because one of the things I did was actually make a program on women in Pakistan during her first premiership and the impact that she had had on women in Pakistan. And it was exactly, I find your comment echoed in others I interviewed. And I remember when I spoke to Asma Jahangir about it, she said, yes, you know, she's prime minister. And so it gave us this sense of lifting the glass ceiling for us, that we could achieve things in our own professions. Obviously, it would take time, but it did lift that glass ceiling. And I think this is something which is sort of underestimated, particularly in the Western world. And that's also what I was writing for, I think, was to show, you know, my Western friends, my Western colleagues, how difficult it was for her in operating in the conditions she was operating, both as a woman and indeed in, you know, what is inevitably described as a turbulent society. And so, you know, I'm again gratified by Aitzaz's comments and putting my memory, my reflections in the political context, because it's all part and parcel of the woman we knew as Benazir Bhutto. And one can only but admire her, because she certainly never shirked from adversity, and she never sort of had no courage. I mean, you can't possibly say she was not a woman of courage. And I think that is part of her legacy as well. You know, she could have had an easier life and just stayed back in the West and not gone back. But it was that conviction. And I think one of the greatest sadnesses, and of course it does have the tragic ending, is, and I've said this before in other forums, is that given her death aged 54, which we now consider, you know, Mr. Bhutto, her father Zulfikar Bhutto was 51 in 1979. She was 54. It's young. She was in her prime. And I think for you in Pakistan, what I feel is tragic is that we'll never know what she might have achieved in her prime, because she was young first time round, there were difficulties, etc. But I think this time, and I was, you know, obviously watching her and very much following her progress of why she went back and what she wanted to achieve. And that, I think that assassination just, it cut short. It was like I felt they'd felled a tree that had become mature. And then what we were faced with was starting again with young Bilawal, you know, a 19-year-old boy at that time. And I think it is a tragedy for Pakistan. As I say, whatever one thinks of her political convictions, it's an assassination inevitably upsets the natural order. And I think that is one of the tragedies, and it's why it does have a sad ending and indeed a sad title. And for those of you who don't already know, The Fragrance of Tears, it's a quotation from Shah Abdul Latif, and the great Sindhi poet who she introduced me to in that early summer of '78. I had, of course, never heard of Shah Abdul Latif, but she loved his poetry. And so I thought having a poetic, artistic title was much nicer than just a generic title. And that's why I wanted The Fragrance of Tears.
Yes. Yes.
So
may I, Stephen, add another little episode. On the 11th of June, 1986, the Newsweek published an interview of Ziaul Haq. It was a question answer. And in giving an answer, Ziaul Haq imputed that she was a Soviet agent. And the Soviets were backing her up. 11th of June, 1986. I was in Lahore. She rang me up.
After 2 months, hasn't she? She just gone. She went back on.
Yes. In that excitement period as yet. And she rang me up. I was in Lahore, and she said, "Can you come over?" I said, "I'll come over." I went, and she said, "Read this. I want to sue Newsweek." I said, "All right. I'll go back to Lahore and I'll send you a draft of the notice." And so I came back. This was the age of the teleprinter. This was the fastest means of communication was a teleprinter, no fax, no email. So I came back. I made a notice, drafted a notice. I sent to her by hand, by air. She made some changes, sent it back. We were suing, threatening to sue Newsweek with $10 million for loss of reputation and for slander and for and the fact that he was a malicious person, having executed her father. So I didn't hear anything on the first day. On the second day, also, it went through without hearing anything. And she kept ringing. She rang me up thrice and said, what if they don't take notice? We'll look very stupid. What if they don't take notice? No, I couldn't say anything. She was right. If they didn't take notice, we would look stupid. Late on the night on the second day, a lady called Diana Daniels, she was apparently the director and the head of the legal department of Newsweek. She rang me up. And she said, have you issued this notice? I said, yes. She said, do you know that you are going to be fighting Newsweek and you know our strength? I said, we are aware of that. You're a very strong party to contest in court. She said, well, are you sure you want to go to court? I said, not if you settle. She said, we can't settle like this on these terms that you are saying. This is too much. I said, but give me a figure. She said, she laughed. She said, with this kind of adventurism, you can hardly be asking for a figure. She said, and no jury is going to give you anything of this kind. I said, Miss Daniel, do you know my client? She said, no. But have you heard of her? Yes, I have. I said, I challenge you to have anyone you want in the 12-member jury, and I won't challenge a single man. But my client is a Radcliffe, Harvard, Oxford Union president whose father has been brutally, wrongly murdered by a military dictator in a third world banana republic, and who's gone back to fight with that dictator. When she steps in the witness box with this background and this fight ahead of her, I give you all the 12 jury members. Remember that. And remember also that she is beautiful. You know what she said? She said to me, give me a couple of hours and I'll get back to you. I, in the meantime, rang up Bibi in Karachi. She said, have they rung up? Have they rung up? I told her exactly what I said. She said, then tell me immediately after you've spoken to them, after she rings you up. I said, I will. But what is the settlement? She's going to say, she's going to quote a figure after all, even if I have under pressure. So she said, I'll take a breakfast with the editors and I'll talk the amount myself. I said, fine. I'll put it to her if she's... So when Diana Daniels rang up again, I gave her both these, and she said, well, we'll work out. I think we can work it out. What do you want in print? I said, I want an apology in the recusal from what you've alleged in the same space. And she wants a photograph in Newsweek of her and her crowds in Lahore. She said, I think we'll find there's that photograph. We'll send you a few options, and then you can choose your option and we'll put it there. And on the 18th of June, Newsweek carried that. She went and had her breakfast with the editors and settled an amount with them. So
Thank you. That sounds like, Mr. Aitzaz, if I can say, that sounds you're a pretty good lawyer. You got a good client. It sounds like you're a pretty tough negotiator yourself. We've got a number of questions that have been.
I got her acquitted in 9 and her husband in 9 indictments.
9 indictments. Yeah. So if I get in trouble, if you're available, I'll be calling you.
You come through. Come via Victoria.
I will come via Victoria. Absolutely. So we have a number of questions that have come in from Facebook. I cannot possibly get through them all, but there's one that actually speaks directly to my own interest, Victoria, which I wonder if you could answer. Somebody has asked, what was Benazir Bhutto's views on dynastic politics? And there's 2 sides of this. What were her views on dynastic politics? And one, did she prepare her son, Bilawal, to take over from her the way she was prepared by her father to actually assume the sort of mantle of control?
Well, that's a very good question, actually, and it's one that, you know, it does need to be answered, and it has sort of 2 parts to it. I mean, if you read the, I think it's the updated version of her biography, and this is something she also repeated to me quite often, but she's written it very beautifully in her autobiography. I did not choose this life, it chose me. And I think that's very important because, again, as a historian, I will say we often have the ability to look at history retroactively and read things and signs which we like to find and like to, you know, fit our narrative. But Benazir herself was not intending to go into politics. She was going to go into Pakistan's foreign service before the military coup in 1977. And I actually still have in my archives an interview that she did, which is headlined, "No Politics for the Premier's Daughter Who Became President," in other words, of the Oxford Union. But of course, the void, and this is what she writes about quite a lot, that was left when her father was arrested, and all, not only him, but all of his colleagues, really thrust her into this position, aged still only 24 at the time. And then, as we know, life gains a momentum. His execution really cemented that role initially. And it was during the period that I was obviously in Pakistan in 78, 79. It was sort of hoped, I mean, one hoped for the best, prepared for the worst at that time, that he wouldn't actually be executed and that he would be acquitted and he would return into politics. And then maybe she might have stepped back. But as that was not going to happen, she obviously stepped in because the expectation was, and this is something which is very, I mean, actually I would say it's South Asian, but it's not unique to other countries. You have political families, you have acting families, you have artistic families, you know, you kind of follow in the pattern of potentially business families. So it really devolved on her, but not I would say voluntarily, but she stepped up. Instead of saying, I can't do this, I'm going to do something else, she stepped up and accepted that challenge, and that became her fate. But she did not expect her son necessarily to go into politics. He'd barely started university. He'd been 1 term. And I think this is where the narrative does change. She at least had finished, she'd had 2 degrees, one from Harvard and one from Oxford when she went back to Pakistan, age 24. Bilawal had just started at Oxford 1 term when he was again thrust into this position. And I would rather say it's, you know, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because if you don't step up to it, you know, you're not fulfilling the family mission, you're deserting, you're opting for the easy life. Whereas if you do, then, oh, well, it's dynastic politics, etc. I do remember one time I think it was about 4 years ago, I was asked a similar question actually to speak on dynasty at the Karachi Literature Festival. And I prepared my notes again online of, you know, acting families and political families, etc., and explaining, you know, why Benazir had gone into politics. But I gave this throwaway remark, which I hadn't really prepared, but it sort of came off out of my mouth at sort of towards the end of my presentation. And I said, you know, if you want to stop dynasty in politics. You've got to stop assassinating your politicians. And that's really what the situation is. Had Benazir not been assassinated, you would not necessarily have had Bilawal in politics. He might have become a lawyer, he might have done anything else, but it's this leaving of a void, it's this premature removal that is so damaging to the development of a parliamentary process. And so I think that's my answer to the question. Yes, during the prison time, her father was preparing for the worst, schooling her, talking to her, you know, and that's what's traditionally regarded as schooling her, that period of 9 months schooling that she had while he was still alive. But had he not been executed, as I say, she might have gone into the Foreign Office or done anything. But it is this premature removal and this huge expectation that you have to step into the void and fill the void that in a way creates this dynasty.
Thank you. That's a very good comprehensive answer. We've got a question here, which really I think for Professor Salima and Victoria both, it's asking, what was Benazir Bhutto's contribution to the women's rights movement in Pakistan, and what might she have pushed for had she not been assassinated?
Gosh, Salima, do you want to go first with that one?
Yeah, but yes, well, the thing is, you know, this is something that has come up. It came up during when she was alive, for example. You'd say, what did she do for women? You know, she's not sort of addressing their issues specifically. And I felt that that's possible. You can interpret it that way because she did not take up, you know, specific issues. She was looking, I think, at, it may have been conscious. She may have decided to, you know, be the prime minister, not only of women of Pakistan, but for all citizens. That's one aspect. But the fact remains, as I said earlier, that by simply being who she was as the prime minister, conducting herself the way that she did, and having this knowledge of what her presence meant, did in fact, you know, give women the idea that, okay, there's no stopping us. And there was a quantum leap during, you know, the period, because don't forget, we'd had the most savage laws put in place during Ziaul Haq's time. And then, you know, when that curtain went down and you had Benazir, my goodness, it was like, you know, the sky's the limit. And so simply by the fact of her being the prime minister, I think it altered the landscape, the mental landscape of women. And you're quite right. I mean, with Asma Jahangir, who was her friend, they very often did not see, you know, the same way politically. But in this issue, they were pals, and I think that Asma understood very well what Benazir's contribution was. You know, just very soon after, just 2 days later, I had an exhibition in my gallery, and we paid a tribute to Benazir. You know, it was 2 days after assassination. There was no light, there was load shedding, and I invited Asma to speak, and she gave one of the most moving addresses. It was by candlelight, and we had lanterns, and we had a small audience. And she spoke of what it meant for women to have a person who they could relate to, even though she was from a different class, she was from a feudal family, but they knew her struggle, and they could truly feel, yes, it's possible for any woman in Pakistan now to fight, and to, if she had the courage, and to be heard. So yes, that was a game changer for women, and it led the way, paved the way for change of laws. She did not have in Parliament, she didn't have the kind of majority to turn back a lot of the laws, the Hudud laws. But nevertheless, I mean, they came to be, you know, in many ways discarded, or rather they were downplayed. But yeah, she was the antidote to Ziaul Haq's, you know, misogyny, I would say.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think, you know, as I say, from my perspective and the Western perspective, again, I would reinforce that we had no idea of the difficulties under which she was operating. And I think Salima's point that when she was a breath of fresh air when she came in, and that fantastic photograph of her, which we all remember, dressed in her green shalwar kameez, taking the oath of office with her white dupatta. There was this feeling that the sky's the limit, but at the same time, there were these huge expectations somehow that she could wave a magic wand and everything could be perfect in the best of worlds. And I think the higher the expectations, the harder it is, in fact. And what I would love to do, just to remind us, because we don't have Asma with us anymore, but when I was writing my memoir, I got out my old tapes, which all my interviews are on cassettes, and I luckily I found a cassette player so I could play them to get the exact quotations. But this is what Asma said, which really reinforces what Salima has just said. She said, there is a feeling amongst women in professions that they can now come to a position of power. Previously, it was not possible for a woman to think that she would be at the decision-making point in any field that she was in. Today, the feeling is there that if I do well, I can make it to the top. And I think that is saying exactly what you're saying, Salima.
Victoria,
Yeah.
I think there's another aspect to it. What she contributed is that which comes and is considered in an ordinary woman in our society, perhaps as a matter of shame, perhaps something to hide, something that is not to be attributed to you, something that is lowly. She did it. I think, well, first of all, the 3 deliveries of children she did. First, during an election campaign. Second, while a prime minister. The third, while her husband is in jail. Now, Pakistani women would be shy of this. Take another matter. The first time she goes to North America, to the United States, when she addresses the joint houses also, the photograph that was on front pages of all newspapers, particularly the family-oriented southern states, was of her, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, coming down the steps of an airplane, carrying her own child, what we Stephen call alti palti, which means one leg is behind her, the mother, the other leg is in front of the mother, and the mother is holding the child up from the bottom. And she walked down the steps like a Pendu, a village woman, a village Pakistani woman. Who would do that? She would have had her child with her nanny come half an hour after she'd left the airport. She was not ashamed of anything, of being a woman. She was not afraid of being a woman. And yet she was tougher than men.
Yeah. No, another thing point I'd like to make is that she did absolutely love motherhood. I mean, obviously she had to have a nanny at certain points, but she absolutely adored those children. And I think that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the story.
And I think she and Asma had that in common.
Yeah, exactly. No, they did. They loved them. Anyway, have we more questions? I don't want to, digress.
Yes, we have a lot more questions we can't get to. There's a variety of them. I do encourage you later, Victoria, to have a look at the comments section, because
Okay.
there are a lot of questions. Apart from anything else, there's several recommendations that this be turned into a television series or a film. So I'll leave that up to you to negotiate with your publishers. But I have a question here, which is actually very personal. It's asking, what advice did you give her before she returned in 2007? Did you give her advice? Did you say, no, don't do it?
That's again, it's actually a moving and emotional question, because I did not say don't go back. I think some people did say don't go back. I knew she wanted to go back, and I would not ever presume to suggest things that weren't appropriate for her. And I suppose perhaps that was something to do with our long friendship. It was, I understood its progression. I mean, a friendship it's not static. And I knew what the periods in being prime minister were like. I knew what the dismissals meant for her. I knew what the period of exile meant. And everything had come to a sort of, in a way, ahead, that this is what she wanted to do. But I do have a vivid recollection, and I've recounted it in the book, of her standing in my kitchen and us talking about the dangers. And again, dangers that, had, I think, become greater in Pakistan, in that there were suicide bombings. As I say, when I first went to Pakistan in '78, we have to go back to no Kalashnikovs kind of mentality. But now, post 9/11, the suicide bombings and all the targetings that went on. And of course, Musharraf had been himself subject of an assassination attempt. And I remember standing in the kitchen saying, you will take care, won't you? And she looked at me long and hard at that point. And she said, of course, but life and death are in God's hands. And I think this is what, again, it's another side of her courage. If we really want to think about it, she knew the risks. Of course, she didn't want to die, and I think that's very important. I mean, some people most uncharitably said afterwards, well, she wanted to go back because she wanted to become a martyr, and that's the most appalling comment to make. She prepared for the worst but hoped for the best. Again, much like with her father, but it was very, very dangerous. I think I personally cried, and I've put this in the book, when I said goodbye to her for the last time after the first attack in October. I'd stayed on in Pakistan for a week, and I said goodbye to her, and I was crying as I left. I left with her sister Sunny, and we were both crying. And I think I had that terrible feeling that I wouldn't see her again. It was just all very much on edge. I then thought, well, maybe it's irrational fear, maybe it'll be okay, etc. As you get distanced, I was sitting at home in the UK, Christmas was coming, etc. But yes, I mean, I think it was part of her destiny in a way. She had to go back. I think it's tragic we can't actually say who assassinated her. And I think Aitzaz's point is the woman who was assassinated was the steely, courageous, formidable political opponent that certain people didn't want to have around. And that was the woman who was assassinated.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's in your book, the way you frame it, you begin the book with that tragic ending. So we know from the outset that is overshadowing all of the happy moments in Oxford, all of the happy moments of friendship. That's how you start it. It's bookended with that tragedy begins and ends the book. And it does make all of the lighter moments, the humor, the friendship, the love, it makes it very poignant. And I think, personally, when I read it, it makes me appreciate all of those moments in my own life, because we don't know, in this story, we know how it ends, but we don't actually know how any of our stories are going to end. So one of the, I hope the take home message from your book is cherish those moments, cherish those friendships, because they, we really don't know. And in that case, I think it kind of took a fairly brutal end. We have more or less run out of time. I would like, please. No, go ahead. You're the star, Victoria.
No, I was only going to say I agree, and I afterwards her assassination in December 2007. I look back on the meetings we had in 2007 because we met up quite frequently then, and who would have known those were the last meetings I was going to have. But anyway, yes. If there's time for one more question.
Yes. So the last question really is about the aftermath. And it comes from, the question is really to Mr. Aitzaz. You are an extremely popular politician. Arguably, you were one of the most popular PPP leaders in the aftermath. In 2007, 2008, you were there at the lawyers' movement. How might things have been different had you taken over as the leader of the People's Party? And do you think you might to kind of form the Benazir Bhutto legacy more effectively than the leadership that did take over? I know it's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question. And my answer is simple, actually. I think the People's Party voter would prefer one of Benazir's own children to me, and ultimately it is the voter who counts. It's a matter of arithmetics and matter of numbers. And I have no problem in being in a party which remains to date with lots of my misgivings, despite lots of my misgivings, but remains the only party which has a liberal position on a lot of things that in a country which is being strangled by religious dogma, People's Party is a party that does not mix its politics with religion. That I can say is something that is close to my heart, and something that even the founder of Pakistan had said, that religion shall have nothing to do with the business of the state. I find only the Pakistan People's Party as a party, for all its faults. I'm not saying it's a perfect party. I'm not saying we are a perfect leadership. We are not saying that there are not enormous flaws in our ranks. I admit all that. But when I come to discuss or to actually compare political parties, other political parties, particularly at the national canvas, all provinces and Azad Kashmir, I find the People's Party is the only party which does not lean on religion for its politics.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we have more or less run out of time. So I will say that the book is available at all good booksellers. It's available online. You can pre-order it now. It's available to ship on the 15th of October. If I could, I will give the last word to Victoria. Let me thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I think this is hugely beneficial. I think when you read the comments on the Facebook, you will see how much this book is anticipated and how much people are desperate to read about this, as I say, a very intimate, personal, touching relationship, which actually unleashes an awful lot about the politics and the culture of a fascinating place. So Victoria, can I give you the last word? If you would like to, anything more you would like to say about this?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody, you, Stephen, Aitzaz, Salima, and again, of course, Nada and Sohela, who's been doing the technical side. And then I'd like to thank all my viewers and everybody who has commented and put questions in. And I would like to thank Pakistan in a way for welcoming me as sort of one of their own many times through my friendship with Benazir. So often I used to get talked about when people would see me and they'd say, oh, you're Benazir's friend. I mean, she may not have realized it, but it was because I was Benazir's friend. I was given so much hospitality, so much love. And I hope people who read this book will see that I have written it from the heart. I've written it with as much authenticity as I possibly can, given that I'm a historian as well. I don't like massaging the facts or altering the things. It's written as I recorded it, and I'm glad I did keep a lot of documentary material, because it does bring an immediacy. Even things I'd forgotten, I then found in my diaries and letters, and letters I'd written to my parents. So I would just like to thank everybody, and really with Benazir, and I think even her critics, you know, to be very critical of somebody, you have to understand them and what enormous difficulties they were working under. And I think, again, you know, the epitaph for Benazir, it is her huge courage and her huge humanity and her kindness and generosity of spirit, which I personally was able to witness. So thank you all, and thank you for viewing, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations and Bloomsbury, Pakistan, thank all of our audience. Thank Professor Salima Hashmi, Mr. Aitzaz Ahsan, and of course, Victoria Schofield for giving us the time and talking about a fascinating book. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.